Happy Memorial Day, everybody, and welcome to our family YouTube channel, A Little More Family History, dedicated to the ancestors and relatives of Ed and Joyce Moore. I hope you enjoy. My husband, Brad, does a little YouTube channel where he does archery with some trivia mixed in, and he was talking about Memorial Day. And I learned Memorial Day was actually set aside right after the Civil War. It got me thinking. We have an ancestor who fought in the Civil War.
He was in our direct Moore family line. In fact, he was my dad, Edward Douglas Moore's great-grandpa, George William Moore.
He would be my second great-grandpa, and if you're one of my children, your third great-grandpa.
You can see right on his headstone there that he belonged to Company A of the 12th Iowa Infantry.
I found out there are two other Georges worth mentioning on this Memorial Day.
We'll hear a little more about them later.
So George William Moore was actually born in Indiana. All the Norman Moore family will appreciate that. He was born in Wabash. I guess that's like the Wabash Cannonball? I don't know. But he was born in 1844. His family bounced around a bit, finally ending up in Iowa in the 1850s. When the Civil War broke out in April of 1861, George was only 17, but when Iowa called for a volunteer infantry, he was right there, and on September 30th, he signed up. They describe him as being 5 foot 10 inches tall, blue eyes, fair skin, and auburn hair. His brother also enlisted and joined that unit, and his friend, George Hoskins, which is our second George. He was just a year older than our George, and they were both from the same town of Eldora, Iowa. If our Grandpa George could talk to us today and sum up what his experience was like in the Civil War,
He probably would have said it was pretty hard. I think he would have described it by saying he was sick a lot, cold, and often in wet and muddy clothes and having to sleep on the cold, damp ground a lot of the time. I think he would have said that he was always hungry, 17-year-old, right? That there was a lot of bad food and not enough of it, and that they did a lot of marching and drilling and waiting around for orders. But I would guess he would say the hardest part were the battles, having his nerves on high alert, trying to keep an eye out for the enemy. And then in engagements, all the noise and confusion, that it was loud and the air was thick with the smoke and the smells of gunpowder and the cries of the wounded.
it's probably not something any of those Civil War veterans really like to talk about. His unit was in a couple of battles, and then they went down to the Battle of Shiloh.
This battle occurred on the 6th and 7th of April in 1862, down near Pittsburgh Landing in Tennessee. It became one of the bloodiest engagements of the war, and the level of violence involved shocked both the North and the South.
Now this battle was so big
That there were over 23,000 casualties.
and about 3,000 were captured for missing in action. Sadly, our Grandpa George was captured in that battle. Now he was put in a Confederate prisoner of war camp where he became very sick with dysentery, which actually plagued him and made him somewhat sickly for the rest of his life.
Now he was released about a year and a half later, either on or before Christmas Eve, 1863.
On Christmas Day, the very next day, he re-enlisted to serve for another 3 years. And the really cool thing is I have his discharge papers from both his first discharge and his re-enlistment, his second discharge.
There's many more really interesting things to tell about our two Georges and their service in the 12th Iowa Infantry, but we'll save that for another video.
On Christmas Day of 1866, the war is over, he's home now, and he marries Mary Ann Hoskins, the sister of his good friend George Hoskins.
Meanwhile, George Hoskins has married one of our Grandpa George's twin sisters, Sophia.
They must have been pretty close because they married each other's sisters. And after the war, the census of 1870 shows them living side by side, renting farms with their wives and their first little kids living there with them. And next to them both is Grandpa Hoskins, my third great grandpa. And interestingly enough, at Grandpa George's household in the census is our next grandpa as a little 2-year-old, the one who was later shot and killed in Raton, New Mexico. But Grandpa George lived to the age of 67, my age now, and he had 5 children and grandchildren. I think it's interesting to know his unit information was posted to the Library of Congress, and in it they did not call it the Civil War. They called it the War of the Rebellion.
In researching this video, I learned that Memorial Day was originally called Decoration Day because it was about decorating the graves of those that had fallen in the Civil War.
Our 2 Georges, George Moore and George Hoskins, did not fall in the war. George's brother, he didn't either, but they did suffer for it. I think that they just felt like they were just doing their part. Decoration Day was changed to Memorial Day, and it kind of got blended in with World War I, World War II, a way of remembering all the who have fallen. We did have one who fell in the performance of his duty, and this is our 3rd George, my dad's uncle, George Phelps Moore.
He was the son of our grandpa, William Burgess Moore, or Will Moore, who was shot and killed in Raton, New Mexico in 1903.
It was a pretty rough time, and Graham was, my dad called her Graham, was trying to make a living. In 1910, Uncle George lied about his age, and at the age of 15, he went and joined the Marines.
Neither of these boys is George, but it's pretty clear he wasn't the only one lying about his age in those days.
He was born in 1894, but he told the military he was born in 1888. And he gave a false name, the name of Guy P. Mann. Eventually, he changed his name back legally and got it all squared away with the Marines that was his actual name, George Phelps Moore. He was still in the Marines during World War I, but I don't have any information about whether or not he was deployed to Europe.
I do know that in 1921, he married a woman named Loretto Montague, and he was a gunnery sergeant.
In 1924, he was stationed at Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Unfortunately, there was an accident. During low-altitude gunnery practice, the plane he was riding in crashed. There was a fire, and the pilot was killed on the field, and George was taken to the hospital, where he died 2 days later as a result of severe burns to the upper part of his body. He did die in the discharge of his duty, so he was actually buried at Arlington National Cemetery, which is quite a great honor.
On Memorial Day every year, that's when the President of the United States lays the wreath in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier. So it's pretty cool to know that our uncle was buried there. Uncle George, he did not have any children, and his wife later remarried, actually his friend. So the old story of the friend comforting the widow, you know. But
in George's family, there were 4 boys, and they all served in the armed forces.
His older brother Bill, he also served in World War I.
George, who served in the Marines.
My grandpa Ed also served in World War I, and his youngest little brother Lawrence also served in the Army Air Corps.
You know how May is usually considered the month of graduation for high school and other students? Well, it almost seems like the month of May has been a time of graduating from this life for an unusual number of the Moore family. My dad's dad, our dear Grandpa Edward Burgess Moore, graduated from this life on May 12th, 1964. My dad's uncle, George Phelps Moore, also graduated from this life in May, on May 30th, 1924. Their oldest sister, Ethel Evelyn Moore Parsons, who the kids knew as Aunt Hun, also graduated in May, on May 13th, 1986. On May 6th, in 1934, Graham herself graduated from this life, and sadly, just 9 days later that same year, their little brother Lawrence also passed away on May 15th, 1934. And our dear great-grandpa, George William Moore, who served in the Civil War, passed away on May 25th, 1911. And even his good friend and eventual brother-in-law, George Hoskins, our second great-granduncle, passed away on May 23rd, 1914. My own dear dad, Edward Douglas Moore, graduated from this life on May 18th, 2020. Since we've been talking about Georges on this video, I'd like to give a shout out to one more George in our family, my cousin, George Margetts. He is the nephew of my mom, Joyce Burt Moore, and he is a keeper. We love you, George.
We really have quite a legacy of people who have served this country, some real patriots, and so I'm very proud of them. And I hope that we can take a minute and think about the sacrifices that have been made by them and so many others, that we live in the land of the free because of the brave. And I hope you enjoy this. Thanks, and again, happy Memorial Day. I love you all.